I've, Hi, Michelle.
Hey, Doug. Hey, everyone.
You are not Todd Kidda.
No, I'm not, but I'm going to try my best to fill in for Todd.
Yeah.
I'm Michelle Gilbert. I am a Teams technical specialist with Microsoft and an overall Office 365 enthusiast. So happy
Yes.
to be here with Doug.
And you've been on before, so you are at least somewhat known to our group, and you're occasionally a heckler from the far side when we mess things up or do. So I'm solo producing, got cameras and keyboards in all the wrong places today. So if I'm looking in the distance or the wrong place, apologies. It's not a normal show day. Um, we're gonna dive in on Android work profile, right?
Yep.
SharePoint Spaces ship. So we're gonna talk a little about that. I'll probably have to live pull that one up. We're going to talk about some API announcements, the Microsoft Productivity Score, because our stream crashed last week and we could not reconnect to it. It looks like it's holding steady. That's why I'm trying to kind of watch all this stuff on top of it. Azure AD conditional access API. So it's a lot of you think about the whole reason this logo looks like it does for the show. It's because of Mind the Gap, right? There's a GUI, there's an API, and a PowerShell for something, for everything. We're mostly talking about the API surfaces this week, right? So the automation layer that Michelle, you and I so love. There's nothing wrong with the GUI, but if you need to change it for more than 10 people, or you want it automated from something else, you got to have a connect for it, right?
Correct.
Now, so that's what we're going to talk about. I'll at some point hit to the logo slide, pull up the SharePoint Spaces. I'll kind of let you walk us through that one if that's all right, because that was your I kind of missed it when GA. I was so focused on all this other Devi stuff this time around that I just wasn't paying any attention to it. So Michelle's like, "You can talk about that." I'm like, "Well, we sure are now." So we try and do our best to curate the news. All right, so here we are. So this actually is an interesting post from the Microsoft To Do team, which talks about using Microsoft To Do an Android work profile, which I think gives an awesome example. If you are an iOS user, you probably may not be aware that Android Device Admin is getting deprecated in Q4 of 2020. What year are we in? Oh, that's right. We're in the dumpster fire that is 2020. As if you didn't have enough to deal with, your users are going to have to go through this Android work profile shift. And it's an important one because it goes through what is it and how does it work and how does it affect things. Now, if you look on this one, you can see essentially this is the Play Store, and you have two different things. There's a work and a personal tab within the application store, and all of your work apps are going to get a little briefcase, and they are truly enclaved from each other. This technology actually was pioneered, if you remember, back in the BlackBerry days, right? Before when they were still trying to do it, where they had this sort of, full isolation of a work element. Well, that kind of approach, albeit much more modernized, has come to Android. And the user experience can be confusing if you don't coach people through it. Fair enough?
Oh, yeah.
Like you and I hit this. You were talking about challenges with custom launchers.
Yeah, and if you have a custom launcher, basically what you get, instead of it really nicely baked in to have, here's my personal, my professional life. If you have a custom launcher, now you have double the amount of applications. And so you have to kind of pay attention to that briefcase that's going to tell you, oh, I'm going into my work life.
That's right. And now the advantage here is that if you, I tested this because I was messing around with some device stuff. And if you remove the work profile, it all goes away. Now, I had made a mistake on this in that I use Microsoft Authenticator as my MFA for tons of different applications. And I had registered all of my personal authentications into the work instance of Authenticator.
No.
So riddle me this, Michelle. When I had my work profile reset, what happened to all of my personal authentication profiles?
Oh boy, you had to go into the Doug's Wayback Machine in the bowels of your brain to remember your personal passwords.
Yes, and I had to go through the reset protocols and the MFA clear protocols for all the things that I use that for. So it does what it says it does. It fully segments it. Now, there can be some irritating things where, let's say you're in your work profile and maybe you're allowed to do this, maybe you're not. But if you were to add your personal mail accounts to your work version of Outlook so that you have all of your calendar stuff together in one view, which is super important to me. I don't like having multiples. Well, I told Michelle this. I was taking a picture of some stuff around my house. I was going to mail it off to some family members because I just happened to be there. You kind of sometimes you text, sometimes you email, and you're just kind of in that modality. You're like, oh, I'm in here doing some stuff. I'm going to send this off to some people. And I hit the like browse for camera, and the work couldn't see the camera because the camera is in which profile?
Yeah, the work profile
It's
or
in
the
the work profile. So a lot
yeah.
of the core apps like contacts and other things, they now have like there's two of them. And you either have the briefcase or you don't. You can see it on screen, company portal. So a lot of the Android applications, the core services, when you go to tap a launch, there'll be a little thing. Open it with work profile or open it with. So there's some differences in the UI. And so if you're an iOS person, you're gonna need to get some quick videos here to show people how this works, is my point.
Mhm.
So I put the link out. The to-do one references a whole bunch of stuff on exactly how you do it and how it goes through. And then obviously, if you go out and look for the Android work profile enrollment, they've done a nice job of showing the exact screenshots they're going to come through. I think it's worth getting a screencast and recording it in your first party voice. Like, don't use these screenshots, or like record it for your enterprise, take a few minutes, make a personal version of this for your audience. Because I think it's important that the usability behind this goes super good. I'll be candid and tell you, I don't think I got that experience inside of Microsoft. I think they picked on us as technologists, and I hadn't paid much attention to it. I was like, oh yeah, I got to do this thing, and it's good, and it's secure, and it's segmentation. But if you remember, the pillars of security we've always talked about is, do you know who it is? Is it really Michelle? Can you grant access based on risk in real time? Can you get can you protect the data at rest and in transit? Can you see the events, and do you have the compliance you need? So you have all the auditing and pillar 5 of security is what? The user experience.
Right.
And I feel like we kind of sold ourselves a little short on this one. Like if you're going to change this level of thing on your user community, you got to give them a heads up.
Right.
And I think that, maybe I think the level of communication may have depended on the dominant platform of the people who own the Intune. Because some of my customers they told me, who I talked to, did like, oh yeah, we did all this work and we communicated to people. I'm like, well, what do you use? Well, I'm an Android user. Well, of course you did it then, right? If you were an iOS person, you might have looked at this and gone, oh, this doesn't look too bad. But
yeah,
it's pretty significant. Now, you pointed out, we talked about some of the negatives and the challenges, but you gave me a super awesome positive one.
I did, but I didn't share my experience. So, like you, just to be again candid, it wasn't the easy experience, and the reason why is because I use biometrics a lot for authentication, and in setting this up, I had to remember all my pins, my passwords, the MFA, my MFA options. And so that's fantastic. I'm glad they have it secure. However, for end user experience, just know that you're going to have to coach and make sure everyone knows what they are going to need when they do it, or else they may stumble and then get stuck. So frustration could be high. But the positive side of this, Doug, that I found is that I can set my work profile to have specific work hours. So I don't get pinged from Teams or Outlook when it's 6 o'clock on a Friday night. I could if I wanted to, but I can set my work hours, and I think that's been really helpful for me because it's really easy to be out and then want to answer someone when you're off work, especially now that we're all working from home. Why not work all the time? Well, no, let's not work all the time, and let's try to give ourselves these barriers and really set our work hours that work for us. And so that would be my positive for the Android work profile.
Yeah, I thought that was a fascinating example of like, this is a good thing about. So there's some usability goodness, but I feel like whenever you ask for security, I always feel like there should be a give get, right? And maybe it's one-sided, but you got to explain the context for it. So I kind of wish the comms had come out like, look, this is changing. Android's changing how they do this. You're going to have to go through this change. What you need to get ready is this. Maybe some countdown announcements to it a little bit, right? And here's some pro tips if you get stuck. Here's some resources, and here's also some of these cool things that you can do. The delighters, right? You can now have the segmentation. You had it. So I feel like the security message came through loud and strong, but the usability message didn't, and I didn't like that. So if don't do what we did, what Michelle and I experienced, I guess would be the lesson for today. We can always get better. There's so many amazing things that happen with every corporation. There's times where you have learnings. And I think we're just trying to share some of those learnings with you all. Okay,
Yeah.
so in the post, you'll have the different Android workplace links that I did on top of it, managing the work profiles with Intune, that profile registration screen, all the rest of that kind of stuff. Okay, so let's go over to what locked up last week, which was productivity score. I've been super enthusiastic about this since the very first moment it came around. And it's way more than just the soft telemetry that happens on top of it. So they talk about powering your digital transformation with the score. But what I wanted to do is show you out, like, this is an entire telemetry set, a whole set of data that comes together for a telemetry package around a whole bucket of different activities. And a lot of them are what I would consider soft impact, like the you know what I mean? Like whenever I'm doing our return on investment studies for customers, I'm like, well, there's, observable. I use the Cranfield School, the observable, measurable, quantifiable, and financial benefits, and things you want to start doing, things you want to stop doing, and things you want to do better at. And I make that in a grid, and I say, and there's what I call the quadrant of mush, which is just, you're going to be more productive, Michelle. You're going to be more connected. And there's not value to those things. There certainly is.
Right.
But there's also the hard measures, right? The things that cost people time. And this score has both. And I feel like they kind of opened with the soft measures and went through on top of it. So they talked about the productivity score and what it has. And then they released an amazing Microsoft Mechanics video. And this is where I got locked up last week when I said, sometimes we just point to other resources. So this is Jared Spataro's overview video. I sort of zoomed in on the YouTube video, which you can go search for from the productivity score announcement if you want to. An awesome Microsoft Mechanic videos. And they've done a really good job of chapterizing the video. So you can hop to the individual elements of the score. I like it when people do this, right? Yeah. So if you want to hop around and say, hey, like, what's in the communication category, right? Meetings, content collaboration, right? So you can kind of get a sense of the different elements of that score, looking at how your org communicates, what kind of modalities used. Again, interesting soft insights across the categories, right? If you just wanted to go into the meetings category, you can say exploration about video, like how long is video, how much has screen sharing. Very insightful analysis as to how people are doing it using these tools that are on top of it. And again, there's the overall productivity score. How are we doing on modern content collaboration? Okay, you get the idea. These are all the soft ones that I was talking about. Teaming. And I don't want to blow past these because I do think they're important, but I am going to blow past them because I like some of these ones a little more than I like the middle. Now, I know it depends on your role, right? Mm-hmm. And so everyone should look through these different elements, find out what's important to you. But if you look, you can talk about cross-operating system, how many people are using Outlook and Teams on different platforms. This kind of stuff allows you to understand, like, the importance of your mobile support strategy and the rest of it. So we're getting a little more ratcheted into some of the less soft measures, which I know are super important. But again, the hard measures kind of come to the end of this video on top of it. They talk about the network connectivity and geographic network boundaries and where people are using it. So if you're an enterprise IT admin, as opposed to, I almost feel like there's like your user community, your user adoption, your champions data, and that's in the beginning of the productivity score. And as you go through, it kind of moves to the technology stack.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
And I love that you have that continuum of assessment. But I do think this is fascinating where they actually say, hey, here's exactly how network's happening, right? Here's where performance is, here's criteria, because if it's not performing well, if the concrete base isn't there, the soft measures are going to stink.
Right.
Agree? So I like that they open with the soft measures, but go to the right and check some of these other ones out, because it talks about that, sort of detailed network analysis and recommendations, right? As to, where you're going through. Are you using a non-optimal SharePoint Online service front door? I mean, there's real tactical recommendations for performance here that are highly actionable by you or a partner or someone else who really wants to break through and go through that. And they're actually talking about, like, actionable things and recommendations across the estate, which I'm a super big fan of. Then you start getting into the 365 application health component. We announced, like, they had the OneDrive synchronization dashboards they found, and OneDrive client health and stuff that have been out there. Well, they talk about the Office 365 app health. How many people are in what channels, right? How is the Office application staying current going? And I think those are interesting things to consolidate into this view so you can see this overall dashboard from a service integration standpoint. And then we start to get in some fascinating areas around endpoint analytics. Now, this is the former Windows analytics stuff that we've shown off at a telemetry level a few different times over it. But I'd like to call your attention to this endpoint analytics score, which now has startup performance, proactive remediations, and recommended software. So some of this stuff was originally surfaced in the intelligent Windows update recommendations to talk about how to get people on and stay current with Windows. But they talk about, hey, what percentage are not in Windows Autopilot, what percentage enrolled in Azure Active Directory on top of it. And then they start getting in very specific about what proactive remediation steps you can go through. And I think I have a screenshot, although I may have a hard time hopping around to find it while we're live and on the air. It goes back to Jared. We're in the startup performance one. There it is. You can see that what the boot score is, and then you can dive into individual machine models and see how much are you paying from a penalty standpoint for group policy, how long for core sign-in, how long for a productivity desktop access, and then what machines and what users are fitting into what performance categories. So these are all of my sellers, right? You can now build the data model like this. It doesn't quite have it out of the box, but you can lens the data together to produce this. Who am I impacting with long boot times? You know what I mean?
Right.
And what is their job? And what would that mean to them? They'll actually put it in by like quantifiable tie-ins in some of the logs. You've seen the other screenshots for it. So when it says like model performance, device performance, they'll tell you breaking down by model. And they have like the hard drive type in there. So solid state drives versus, remember a lot of those laptops came with those monster 1 terabyte drives, but they were 5,400 RPM. Well, it's going to be slow. You have a big garage, but the garage door opens super slow. And so you can really analyze your environment through this almost end to end, from how's the soft stuff going, how's the formal productivity stuff going. So this is where I wanted to go last week, and the crash and unable to resume of the stream hit me. But I think this is a phenomenal overview. I've been pushing this tool since it was alpha stages. I pushed it when it was early, the Windows performance stuff that was just in there. And now the whole thing has been brought together under this performance score. Now, there is log configuration, and we covered in previous posts probably about 6 months ago, but all the documentation's out there, like what does the data custodianship look like? What logs am I shipping? Well, you're putting them into your own logs workspaces in your Azure subscription, right? So, and unless you want to get some of on the Windows analytics side, there is some of the ability to do that Dr. Watson correlation on the hybrid systems management, stuff, which they have some amazing, but you don't have to opt into all that to get this stuff, right? This is based off just the normal. So there's some things you might choose to share data to Microsoft so we can give you back conclusions. In this particular case, you would be taking anonymized data and sending it for analysis. This compute model runs within your Azure subscription, within your tenancy, right? It's your data, it's your lens on your data. And so I think it's really interesting lenses. I've never seen a better curation of us from soft to hard measures in one place about the environment. I am truly impressed with this work and think it is a worthwhile project sprint for almost any enterprise to go through.
Yeah, completely agree, Doug. One thing to note is that you need to actually turn this on. So when you get out into your tenant, under the service area, you need to go to Productivity Score, which is a tab, and click on Enable. And that will start really gathering all that data so it can create those wonderful graphics for you.
Yep. And then they talk about, hey, it talks about the endpoint analytics, performance of your hardware and software. So it goes through the whole thing as to how the score works, where, how you activate the different ones. Some of them are just pure M365 logging surface where you check. Others, you're going to have to go configure things in order to get that level of performance characteristics coming from your desktops into a log workspace and then tie it in. So,
and it's important to note, though, Doug, much like the secure score and the compliance score, you have your own interpretation of productivity. It's going to be unique in every organization.
Yes.
So realizing if you want to take that score and report up to executives, you may want to explain what is that score, because not everyone may live in a meeting and maybe that's not their role.
That's
so
right.
if that's going to be calculated, you need to be able to really interpret and explain that well, what those percentages do mean.
Yeah, especially on the soft side, right? Like, which one of those things represents good for your organization is really something that's unique.
Right. And I know in Secure Score, you can basically take the list of actions that aren't applicable to your company and remove them from being scored. So I'm hoping it matures in that way.
I haven't set it up in my demonstration environments. I've been nerding out on Azure Data Factory, egressing data for compute against like all sorts of stuff. And I've been working on that for a little while. So I've been messing around with sort of the Graph Data Connect functionality. I'm going to return my attention back to the data accessibility model of this, because if I can combine that with other data models and build my own custom Power BI reports, which I don't know the extent you can do that right now. And again, a lot of times they release these GUIs first, then they start exposing, Power BI data kits and other things. But a lot of these have raw data sources that are accessible. So I will commit to some point before the holidays are over to having, how do you access this data and what parts are easily accessible? And if not, I'll find out the roadmap for it. But damn, that's amazing.
Yeah, it really is amazing. I mean, talk about just the maturity in our products and in our analytics to go from, hey, we're going to show you 30 days of something, to the M365 usage analytics. Teams is getting a lot more analytics. I think there's like now 9 reports you can get in there. And then to come up with productivity score, which really takes what I think most companies need right now is, how are people feeling engaged in that soft space, but then how is their performance and against trying to connect out and get productive and feel productive. So I'm super excited for this too.
With all these remote devices and stuff, like, how are they performing? We haven't seen them in a while. Maybe you haven't seen your devices in some time, and people are like out there super frustrated, and you don't know. Like 7-minute boot times. Why?
Yeah.
Right? Great question. Maybe we should go look into that.
And correlate that. Correlate the 7-minute time to the network location that actually is in red.
Yeah. Well, now you have these different. That's my point. You have the different. We're saying the same thing. Right? So Michelle and I are huge fans of this. We both worked in actual enterprises before doing this, right? So this is one of those ones where I see the IT director in me wants to know my user engagement is happy with this. The infrastructure admin in me is happy with this, and the data nerd in me is happy with this. So I think go do in the strongest possible way. Okay, so moving on from productivity score, a week delayed, there was an announcement from Alex Simons on the Azure AD component, shifting entirely away. We're going to security. There's a new user authentication methods user experience inside of Azure AD under the authentication methods, where it simply clearly shows the authentication methods, that you can do management of them. Nothing to see here other than goodness. It's better on top of it. And there's some updates to the authentication phone numbers, right, on top of it, and some cautionaries around this. But the real thing for me was there's a bunch of new graph APIs. You can read and remove a user's FIDO security keys. You can read and remove a user's passwordless phone sign-in capability with Authenticator. You can read, add, update, and remove email addresses for SSPR. And so they show back, like when you fetch back an authentication method. So if you just pop into the Graph Explorer and do the get framework against this, here's your, JSON response where you can say, hey, here it is. Is SMS allowed by policy? Yes or no? There's also a scholarly article up in the security blog, by the way, about why you shouldn't be using SMS or voice anymore. You should be using apps, right? And particularly because you don't really own the custodianship of an SMS transaction, right? A text code comes in, but that can be, if you're talking about nation state level security, as it crosses geographic boundaries between nations. So if you're traveling, that foreign telco sees that text. It's not encrypted. It's pretty simple. And so people are like, hey, if that matters to you, then but normally it wouldn't. But it all depends on how secure your information needs to be.
Right.
Okay, so interesting API announcements on the authentication stuff. So go check out the post from Alex on that. It'll be up in the show notes when we post them up there. All right. Next up on top of it, if you do not check out, which I know probably a lot of people don't have time to read all this stuff, which is why we try and do it for you. But the 365 patterns and practices ecosystem stuff is really interesting. And they have some curated content and the rest of the stuff. They also have the developer post, which I keep a special attention on from a content standpoint. And first, if you're tired of trying to keep up with the changes in the Microsoft graph itself, there's a graph change log with an RSS feed now. All right, so this one's, I was like, hey, don't bury this lead, right? So they've got a filterable RSS feed with updates for your favorite graph API. So if you're like, these are the ones I'm leveraging and using and care about, I kind of want to know at it. I like they said here for updates, they've used some magic to look at pull requests and generate more timely and accurate updates. It's not magic, it's data. So anyway, I just think this is super useful for if you're building on top of these things to be able to get a feed in. I don't know whatever you use, Feedly, you can put it into Teams, right? You can do, if your team's using some of those APIs, pretty cool on top of it. Also,
it goes back to managing change and where do I find all the change? So having an RSS feed to a team, what a fantastic way to just keep up by getting that pushed notification as opposed to going around trying to find it.
Yeah, if you're got a channel, you're using those graph APIs, then when an update hits it, your team will just get notified. Done. Yep. So we also announced the GA of Teams resource-specific consent and read channel messages. Now, why do you care about this? Because there's a huge user voice request for developers that want to build apps that read messages and manipulate channels, but must not have access to the entire tenant, right? It's that allows you and me to activate an app for our team, Michelle, that doesn't essentially require access to every team everywhere. A little better, just a little better principle of least privilege instrumentation, just a little. So for me, this really opens up a much broader use for, it gets rid of a lot of frowns I get when I go through this stuff with developer and governance groups on top of it. The To-Do API got released. I say this one with a chuckle because I'm terribly concerned that people will use this API.
I think I know where you're going with this, Doug.
Michelle, I would like to programmatically generate some to-dos for you today. I don't know, used judiciously. It could be really interesting from a personal standpoint, right? And of course, we've had some of these things exposed over in Flow frameworks, right? So what you can do over there, you can do over here. And so you could abuse anything. I just think this really does put, now note that it does have a CRUD, so it could close one down as well. So it could,
right.
It's not all about, it does say CRUD. It's got all the elements in it, not just C, right?
CRUD is your create, read, update, delete. So to do delete.
If you have a C only list, that's like the dangerous API. I may generate to-dos for Michelle's, but I cannot remove or handle them. All right, so that one's pretty cool. A couple other ones in the P&P announcement, but those are the major ones. I want to let you know, like if you had an ERP integration where you want to toss to-dos out, and then and generate it back. Haven't looked at subscription for completion events, and to see around that, I would suspect at this point, just based on a cursory look, that's not there, that you would have to kick it back. You have to have a tracking list somewhere of the ones you generated with an ID and then go fetch updates. I'm not aware of a subscription event that you can catch changes to unless you can look at the holistic change log. So I haven't really tried to do an enterprise full life cycle on these things, but the lightweight stuff is there for integrations if you need to do it for now. So as soon as I get these, I start to go, ooh, well, how would I scale it and really use that at an enterprise level?
Yes. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll see you next time.